And this session is the Fashion Solutions Breakfast, and it's in partnership with UN Fashion Charter. I'm Lucy Shea. That's Tugger. I'm the CEO of Futerra, and I'm so delighted to get the chance to host a fashion breakfast because, as we know, fashion has huge impacts on climate. It has serious issues, but it's also kind of fun. And I'm a great believer that if you want it done, make it fun. And I think that's what fashion can bring, along with many things, to the climate debate. And we've tried to do that through the last 20 years at Futerra, through starting the Refashion Awards back in 2008, to setting up the Swishing global campaign, to helping launch Fashion Revolution, and working with our clients on many bold goals and sustainability strategies, always bringing in that kind of logic and magic, the deep sustainability expertise, but also the creativity. Now, fashion obviously connects us all, and as I say, it's this great way into climate. There's so many links: fashion and energy, fashion and nature, fashion and people, fashion and biodiversity, fashion infrastructure, and fashion and culture. And someone said to me on Sunday at the opening ceremony, "Oh, you've got all those doers over there at Solutions House." So I am so delighted to welcome onto the stage the bunch of most amazing doers, some of whom I've worked with, all of whom I admire greatly. So I'm going to step down and move to the side and welcome up our panel, and I'll introduce them. So on the panel, we have, let me just make sure I get all of your titles right. We've got Devon Leahy, Global Head of Sustainability at Ralph Lauren. We've got Isabella Marras, who is Senior Programme Officer, Interagency Affairs at UNEP, United Nations Environment Programme. We've got Ngozi Okaro, who's the Executive Director of Custom Collaborative. We've got Ulrika Leverance, who's the Head of Green Investment at H&M Group. And we've got Lindita Xhaferi-Salihu, who's Sectors Engagement in Climate Action Lead at UNFCCC. So can you put your hands together? A warm welcome for our fantastic doers. All right, and sorry, folks online, we will lift Tagada up in a moment. We got a lot of kind of flack yesterday about, we can't see Tagada, show us Tagada. Okay, so Devon, I will start with you and around, well, we're going to canter through quite a few of the big themes for fashion. So let's start with circular. Yeah. A circular business, clearly exponential solution to climate change. And I wondered if we could, talk a little bit about some of the opportunities you see to scale up circularity in fashion, because that's, I think, what a lot of us are really trying to do, is do that piece from taking it from pilot to scale. So if you could tell us a little bit about Ralph Lauren and your role in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, in so many areas of sustainability, we get asked, like, what's the big opportunity? And I think in circularity, what makes it so exciting, but also challenging, is that it's not an opportunity that we need to scale up. It's multiple levers at the same time. It's systems level. And so the biggest opportunity is to really, when we're evaluating investment or looking to scale pilots, we have to be considering the full system that program, initiative, or lever sits within. And so at Ralph Lauren, we have developed our strategy to look at design and product creation, manufacturing, at the solutions and experiences that we want to connect want to be able to connect our consumers with, and our customers, our partners, and the innovation that we have to invest in order to make that product that we create and that solution that we connect the consumer to part of a circular economy. So investments in new technology, in logistics solutions, have to be paired with all of our efforts in reimagining our approach to design and product. We actually had the opportunity yesterday to spend the day with many of our design leads across the company, working on the creation of circular design principles. And so we think of that as foundational and really part of, or the beginning almost of that flywheel that we need to be investing in. So I think that's really where we see big opportunities to scale up is in that, in that systems approach.
Oh, that's brilliant. Now, we'll, I'm sure, be returning to circular. And again, if you have questions, please do get them in online. But I'd like to link to another big issue now with Ngozi, because with climate change, obviously, it really affects adversely women far more than men. And we are getting a much better understanding of the need for climate justice, been hearing that much more around Climate Week than in previous years. But what I'd really love to look at is how fashion can really build the female economy. And I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit through your work at Custom Collaborative. And I won't paraphrase your vision and mission, which I'm a massive fan on. I'll let you do that piece. But I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about the work and the impact you've achieved so far in this area.
Sure. So at Custom Collaborative, our mission is to advocate for and with and support and train low and no income and immigrant women, immigrant to the US, in developing sustainable fashion careers. So that could be businesses of their own or working for others. It's important that we center women because women make up the majority of the workforce of the fashion industry, and except for some notable exceptions, most of whom we know are not in the C-suite of these jobs, right? So women produce the clothes, women make the buying decisions, but women are not on parity with the work that they have. And further, I think it's also important to note that we center also the people who are the global majority. The global majority, so Black and brown people, are the ones who are suffering the most from the climate changes and having to leave their homes most, to go to other countries. And so what we try to do is train women to have skills where they can have viable careers and earn living wages. And so in addition to training them and supporting them as they develop businesses, making sure they have grant opportunities and everything else, we are also advocates. And so we took some people last week to this Congress to support the Fabric Act, right? Because it's all about all of the ways that we have systems, as Devon said, right? There's a system. There's not just one or two things that you change, but it's all about like, well, how do we get to the root cause and change it?
Thank you, and thank you for bringing in the Fashion Act as well. Are there any other enablers that you think we need for this cultural shift? Because again, we're picking up on the systems piece, which I love. Could you expand on that a little bit?
For sure. So I think as someone who is sometimes a systems thinker, I think if we can go back to the genesis of this fashion system, right? Because it hasn't always been that we buy massive amounts of clothes and throw them away. Like, how did fashion get industrialized? And how was that possible? And whose back was that on, right? And so if we think about, let's say, cotton in this country, in the US, like, how did cotton become king? Well, through forced labor, right? And so the systems that we have, I think, continue to derive from low paid labor or sometimes forced labor. And so if we think about that and think about what are the inputs that actually go into fashion, whether it's labor or whether it's the chemicals that make up these fibers, like that's where we need to get to and make change from there, I think, rather than expecting that consumers will have the issue by just mending their things.
Right, thank you. And Devon, do you want to pick up on that as well? Because I know you do a lot of work with women in factories.
Yeah,
and
I think exactly. And I think, plus one to everything and Ngozi's raising, I think it really underpins so much of what we do in sustainability and citizenship work inside of companies like Ralph Lauren. And on the within the supply chain, just I think evidence of the paradigm shift that you're describing. We've really focused on creating pathways for women who make up over 80% of the workforce in manufacturing, pathways for women to take on management positions within factories. It's typically women are working and men are managing. And the shift that you see, so we set a goal to have more than 25% increase in women in factory leadership roles. So I think probably a lot of the same approaches: training, capacity building, seeing a career beyond working maybe on a production line. That has a really high correlation with reduction in some of the maybe human rights issues or unconscious bias impacts that we see in many work settings, and particularly in factory settings. So I think just that the importance of building women's capability, leadership potential within our industry at every level, from C-suite to the factory floor, is really important.
Great. Lots of nods, lots of agreement. All right, so now we're going to segue to another topic again, because obviously we're here at Climate Week, and all these issues are interconnected, but we're going to take a moment to dive into kind of decarbonising and sustained efforts to decarbonise the fashion supply chain. And I'd like to take a moment to kind of look at where are some of the opportunities and where some of the edge might be in this. So Isabella, I'm going to go to you next. You coordinate the Greening the Blue, the report, which gathers greenhouse gas emissions data from all over. When we talk about the need to decarbonise the fashion industry, what are the areas that you see which have the biggest opportunities for decarbonisation?
Thank you. The way we look at it in UNEP is related to carbon, but we also need to think that the fashion industry is a great contributor to what we call the triple planetary crisis: carbon, biodiversity, nature, and pollution. For instance, in addition to the carbon emissions, the industry consumes the equivalent of I couldn't believe when I read this, but 86 million Olympic-sized swimming pools of water. And you were referring to cotton, which is a highly water and pesticide consuming crop. And 9% of overall microplastics in the world are coming from this industry. So we have identified three major priorities politically that could drive to this shift that you were mentioning, Lucy. So one is a shift in consumption patterns, but from the business side, and so a rethinking of the business model. That's what you were referring to. Another is really working on the production processes that are a major contributor to, for instance, the water issue, in addition to people's consumption. And the third is an investment in infrastructure. For me, it was very interesting to speak before with Rika and Devon, because there is a whole infrastructure that needs to be set up that facilitates innovation, facilitates investment, and this shifts. So for circularity, we need to also work on the infrastructure that is around that. And our calculations is that a transformation towards circular textile business models could generate 700 billion in economic value by 2030. So the shift also brings solution in. And what we see in UNEP, working more on the policy aspect, is that there is some changes in countries to think about legislation and support this shift in circularity.
Yeah, great. What I really love about our panelists is you're both systems thinkers, but also you're doing it as well, with many practical examples on the ground or within the business model. So Ulrika, this is where I'm going to come to you, because I'd love to hear in some quite practical detail, because I think sometimes we need to get quite into the meaty content here, or sorry, the tofu-ish content here, of how do you do this phase out of fossil fuels and transition to renewables in the supply chain? How do you manage the economic barriers, the economic incentives? Can you talk to us a little bit about what you're actually doing?
Yes, I can. And just to start with me, before I came into sustainable finance, I have quite a long background within business operations and financial controlling. And this is why I want to take that angle on it. And what hit me when I started work, that where is the value? Why does not anyone measure the value of these emission reductions that we all talk about? Because I think before we truly do not see that the climate activities that we all perform and want to do, that they are a way to actually keep our future business value or even increase it. If we can see that, then it will be so much easier to get money for all those investments. And I will try to exemplify how we see it. I mean, we can all agree that the change or the decarbonization, that doesn't happen fast enough. In order to significantly decrease the emissions in the production, our suppliers, because let's face it, we brands, we have scope 3 emissions, but that's the emissions that happen at the supplier base. And in order to reduce them, the suppliers need to perform a broad range of investments. Now, if it's within energy efficiency, that can actually be paid off quite quickly because you reduce less energy, so you pay less, and then you can pay for your investment. But if you want to change your coal boiler to a boiler or to something run on renewable energy, that's an investment that has up to 15 years of payback. And in order to make these changes happen quicker, we need to be part of the solution, and we need to find a way to lower this payback time for the supplier. So here we have, on one hand, we have the long-term payback time of all these investments, and on the other hand, we have a financial system that is built on short-term profit expectations. It's really easy, also both in the market as a broad sense, but also at company sense, that climate actions, they get down prioritized, for you have really important day-to-day business activities. So you have a gap within those two, and you need to bridge that gap. And at H&M, we decided to take a holistic view and not only measure the financial gain, we measure the climate impact. Our return on investments with these kind of, that's the emission reductions that are achieved. We need to measure those. Then, for sure, I'm a controller after all, we need to know the cost of those reductions. So, like I said, an energy efficiency measurement is paid off. That will have a lower cost per ton reduced than if you have a solar panel. That's one thing. And then comes the business value. What is the business value? That's the alternative cost. So what is the financial risk of, financial value, sorry, what's the financial value of the risk that you're trying to mitigate? Mm-hmm. And if you can put that into relation, then suddenly you have a value. You can say, oh, if I do this, it costs X, but I actually save Z in the future. And for now, this is internal, but it makes it easier for the organization. So we talk about internal carbon price, but it makes it easier for the organization. And
that's great.
Yeah, and then shall I continue?
Continue.
Okay. So now you have
got so much business model, data here. Basically, keep going.
Okay. So now you have the mindset, yeah, but that doesn't really help. So what has H&M been doing then? Okay, we said, how do we bridge that gap? Let's make a separate budget, a separate resource. So we can calculate through strategy models roughly what a decarbonization, what will it take to reach our scope 3 targets. So that you start with the budget. Then we have, for the last year, the big part of that budget has, for instance, gone to a program where the supplier can apply for funding for decarbonization projects. They want to install solar panels. They want to introduce waterless dyeing technology, etc. Then they can borrow money to a very favorable rent, and the money that's from our purse in that sense. We're happy with the outcome. We approved, I think, around 20 projects the first half year, but it's very clear that it will not be enough. So even if we are a large retailer, we're only a very small share of the supplier total business. We share the supplier with many other brands, and if we collectively can go together and do this together, then we will be so much more efficient. We also need to collaborate with financial institutions because they are better in a way to put up good and efficient finance model, and much more than we as a retailer can do. And then you can ask yourself, so what role can a brand take then together with the banks? Yeah, the brand can have, first of all, they can suggest the investments because they know the suppliers and know what needs to be done. And they can also de-risk a loan, putting in a collateral or a guarantee that then will make it possible for the bank to give a loan to a very low interest rate. And having this in mind, this is what we've been working on. So the last 1.5 years, we've been working together with Consultancy Guidehouse and DBS Bank to set up exactly such a framework where suppliers that share supplier go together and they can offer technical support and financial support via the bank towards the supplier. And this project is ready to implement now. And what we see is once up and running and we can actually show the world that it works, I'm sure that philanthropy or other institution would come in and pitch in with that guarantee so that the brands do not have to do that.
Right. Fab. Thanks, Ulrika.
You're welcome.
Now, Lindita, coming to you. There are Lindita's led the work on the Fashion Charter at the UN for many years, so huge fan of the collaboration that you've brought together. And obviously, many of the issues we've been talking about are big areas of focus for the Charter. Phase out of fossil fuels, for example, is one of the working groups. I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about, you know, in your work on building the collaboration and the movement and the change, you know, what's been some of your biggest learnings, and what have been some of the biggest solutions that have been identified in the work of the Charter?
Yes, thank you, Lucy. So for those of you who don't know, a Fashion Charter brings together about 100 companies that work to define a common narrative of where they need to go. So it's basically an industry-led platform, and the Charter has a set of commitments that go into how do you work with suppliers, scaling renewable energy, phasing out coal, etc. So really, if you look at fashion and you read the Charter, it has not so much to do with fashion. It really seems very much like some technical aspect. And there's multiple technical working groups. And I think what we've learned in the process is that a lot of the companies in the fashion industry have already done what we can call quick wins. So things that were easy, that the solutions were there, etc. And now we're in this phase where a lot of the work that needs to be done really extends to the supply chain. Of course, this is something that has been known for years, but the conversations are really to see how can we now make sure that we achieve 50% by 2030. But as the panelists were saying here, it really is not about greenhouse gas emissions only. And if we only focus on that, not so much can be achieved, because we've got to be thinking about other issues as well there. One thing that is really exciting with the Charter is that there's manufacturers that participate as well. What we hear from them sometimes is that, you know, again, it goes to policy, it goes to the finance, it goes to the incentives and business models. So the question that we need to ask as we're looking for solutions is really, is our economic system going to allow us to achieve decarbonization?
Right. Yeah.
Or do we need to rethink everything really, including, you know, social contracts, including relationships between companies, brands, suppliers, policymakers, etc. Because even if you look at solutions, you know, sometimes people would say, why don't they just phase out coal, for example, which of course is something that we absolutely have to do. But I think a lot of that has to incorporate indigenous communities, local needs, understanding of policy, you know, constructs in those countries, geopolitics, everything else. So really, it is taking a very holistic approach to trying to achieve these solutions. And this is some of the discussions that we're having under the Charter as well.
I love that, and I love this approach, because I think a lot of the time we think, oh, we'll just change the policy, but forgetting that we're all living in this sea of culture which kind of guides our ability to make change in the systems way. And on that note, delighted to welcome, hi Samata, come on up, hi, thank you. Oh, I'm so pleased that you're here, don't worry at all.
Hi everyone.
Hi.
Sorry, I'm coming from a slightly distressing incident, but I'm glad I've made it. I'm fine.
Okay.
And I'm really happy to be here, so thank you.
Very happy to welcome you.
Thank you.
So this is Samata Pattinson, CEO of Black Pearl. Again, long been an enormous fan of Samata's work.
Thank you.
And Samata, I mean, you've really spent your career working at this nexus of kind of culture and sustainability and fashion. And so we've touched on the panel across a range of issues, from circular to just transition, building the female economy, decarbonisation. Okay. But I wondered if you could, thorough, exactly. I've heard you talk in the past about how fashion really connects us, and I've seen you do your "Hey everyone, put your hand up if you're wearing clothes." Which I almost borrowed this morning, but I thought I can't if you're not here. That would be cheeky.
You see people second guessing, like.
Exactly. So I wondered if you could tell us, a little bit about where, and at Futerra, we think this approach on working on culture to drive sustainability is a total game changer. It's been recognised now from IPCC, Annual Report 6 at last, so a little bit more kind of recognition from the sustainability community. But I wondered if you could give us a little bit of your perspective on where you see how it can help and what we can do.
Absolutely. So for me, I'm really, really passionate about the intersection of culture and sustainability, because I think unless we can apply a lens of culture to conversations about sustainability, we will continue to exclude masses of people, but not only exclude masses of people, but just keep kind of coming up short when it comes to solutions. So when I talk about culture, I don't mean this kind of single monolithic definition of it. I look at culture as this thing that's intellectual, spiritual, academic, socio-economical. I look at it through lenses such as values, belief systems. I look at it through things like geographics, age, race, gender, educational levels of attainment. There are all of these different levels of things that we can apply to this word called culture. And that doesn't even layer in music, art, food, the things that we identify as part of our cultural identity, like how we did things growing up, our ways of being, our traditions and our beliefs. And the reason that I think this really complex, multifaceted lens is important is because suddenly the conversations you start having about sustainability get a lot richer, they get more authentic, they get deeper, and you start to understand why we aren't getting where we need to get. So for example, there are certain lenses of culture that I feel are well examined, like geography. We know fairly well that if you're looking at something like climate change, based on where you are geographically, your experience of climate change is going to be quite disparate. Like I have family in Ghana, how they're experiencing floods and things like that is different to me being a Cambridge-born person going to Cambridge and being like, oh, it's really hot in here. It's just a different, experience. And we also know that they aren't really responsible for kind of generating this. And I think another lens that's been really well examined is age. We know that if you're looking at like a youth population, there is this huge mobilization around climate. And we know that we're really relying on these young voices to really push us and steer the dialogue. But I feel like some lenses, oh my gosh.
I tagged her.
Had no idea.
She's our office dog.
But there are certain lenses of culture that haven't been examined thoroughly enough, like disability. Yeah. When you start putting that lens in, suddenly you see, especially with fashion, there are still masses of people who can't even get into the clothes that we're trying to make sustainably, let alone feel like they can participate. If you look at things like values and spirituality, again, there are conversations we need to be having with like faith-based groups about how they're interpreting sustainability through their dialogue of faith. So, and there's all of these pockets of really cool conversations we could be having and should be having if we were just a bit more thorough with this cultural lens. So I'm really enthusiastic about it because I just feel that we're missing out on so many fantastic solutions because we're not kind of being rich enough in how we're probing things.
I didn't prepare this question, but I wondered, when we started out, we were talking about how fashion is this great way into climate because it connects to everything, to ag, to everything, agriculture. Do you think there's something that fashion has particularly in that kind of culture, in that kind of cultural enabler to talk about sustainability?
Definitely. I mean, we know as we travel the world and as we experience these different cultures I'm talking about. So for example, where I'm from in Ghana, we have these symbols called the Adinkra symbols, and they're cultural symbols. There's about 50 of them. And they're in our clothing, they're stamped in, they're dyed in with natural bark, they're on our bags, our hats and so on, but they are literally sustainable messages. There's one called Unsa, which means that you have to value the earth. If you go to Japan, they have this philosophy called In Praise of Shadows, this idea that because we're pushing for this perfect industry and we're pushing for every single item of clothing to look the same, so we went from natural dyes to synthetic dyes and all of the challenges associated with that, we've stopped appreciating the nuance and difference. So we don't look for things that are one-off anymore, which is a huge solution to sustainability. Instead, we're looking at everything to be perfect, everything to be well illuminated. So even as you look at how people express their identity through clothing, there's this amazing stitching form called sashiko, I think it is, and it's basically tiny stabs of embroidery over holes and mends, but the philosophy is about frugality. It's about extending the life, extending how long you're interacting with something through like mending those things and still seeing the beauty in it. So even as you look at how we present ourselves, there's all of this opportunity to still have dialogue about sustainability, but not limit people from feeling like they can't still express who they are.
Glorious. Almost as if we planned it, that leads quite well to Isabella. I'm going to go back to you, but Lindita as well, perhaps, because there's a new playbook, relatively new playbook out on communications from UNEP, worked together in partnership with UN Fashion Charter. And I wondered, Isabella, Lindita as well, if you would, are there any, what are some of the kind of the big learnings? Because again, thinking about fashion and infrastructure, but also fashion and culture, what are some of the big learnings from that guide that you could share with us?
As you say, the playbook is a collaboration with UNFCCC and UNEP, and it really looks at media, marketeers, the whole it's not the communication industry, just it's those who write and speak, magazines and those who write and speak and create a layer of culture, of many, as Samata says, and how the playbook looks at how can we use that force that is used by people as a reference almost every day, if you include media, cinema, etc., to speak about circularity, to reduce messaging related to overconsumption and maybe pass messages that are more related to circularity, longer use of things, etc. So the right message and how to elaborate on the right message is what the playbook looks at. So yes, it's out there, and I don't know, Lindita, if you...
Yes, so it was in collaboration. Actually, Lucy was quite engaged in that process as well, and our friends at Futerra. I think it was quite a very interesting exercise as we were going through stakeholder consultation. And some of the things that came out there were, how do we educate everybody what it means to communicate about sustainability? We may not have all the answers yet, but we need to work together to really be as clear as possible when it comes to communicating that something is sustainable or not. And this also goes to media as well, communicating about what the fashion industry is doing or not doing. Do they have the right knowledge in terms of the complexities, but at the same time, do they know that there are some things that are happening, and how do we elevate that as well? How do we elevate solutions? How do we tell people that things are possible, can happen? Fashion industry is not a steel or cement industry. It's not hard to abate sector. I think the point is, how can we really genuinely work collaboratively, because not one institution or one company can do it by themselves. So really looking at that collaboration aspect and how that could work in this kind of systems thinking, right? Because we're going to have to change everything if we want to get to net zero by 2050, not just the fashion industry, but the entire system. And I think the sooner we realize that, the better. And then one thing I wanted to say about the fashion industry really is that it's got this unique opportunity with so many coalitions out there that are working with industry to try and find best solutions. So I think in the fashion industry, everybody knows everybody. So make sure you don't say anything negatively about somebody else. So it's really lots of friendships there that can be leveraged as a force for good. And I think the playbook in many ways has really been a great resource to serve as a tool for fashion communicators. If you're going to communicate about ABC, here are some of the principles you need to incorporate in your thinking to make sure that we're not communicating the wrong thing to the audience.
Ngozi, did you want to come in on that?
I did, and I'm so grateful that Samata is here and brought this perspective, because all the things that were in my head that I could have said at 11 o'clock, but I can't think of at 8, she said. So thank you. The time zone difference really helped us. Right. So I think one of the things that we need to flag here, and I think, Lindita, what you're talking about, like everybody in the fashion industry knows each other. Well, so one thing that means is that people don't want to hurt people's feelings and say, you can't keep producing all this stuff. Right, and so until we can really talk about that and address that, there has to be another way, and some companies do it with more or less success, producing fewer things at higher price points, right? Producing things that are valuable, that people can own and continue to have. Like, I have one of my grandmother's suits that I think is from the 1950s, right? And I'm always very proud to wear it, and it needs a little mending, and I can do that. But if we produce clothes that we are going to throw away the next season, we really can't get to the bottom, and so we can't ignore that part of the system, right? But I think also, to go back to what Samata says about culture, at Custom Collaborative, we train women from all around the world who are here in New York. And so we have sustainability modules. And one woman from Angola said, oh, I'd never heard of sustainability before I came to Custom Collaborative, but this is just how we do things at home all the time, right? And so if we think about the fact that there are whole countries and continents of people who are not throwing away things and not wasting things, and that is because of their indigenous cultures and their sense of connection to the earth and knowing that they have to live on it, then I think that we can then incorporate those learnings and bring those people into our systems, right? Because if it's the same of us who are in this room coming up with solutions, we're not going to have new things, we're not going to innovate, we're not going to spark different types of thinking among each other. So one thing that Custom Collaborative has been working on for a couple of years is a sustainability fellowship program, right? So that we can bring people into sustainability departments who don't necessarily have the traditional credentials, but through an 18-month program, we could credentialize them and then help infiltrate and come up with real solutions, right? So we're not here next year having the same conversation, right? It's solutions only, but that we've actually made some traction. And I think, as Isabella said, there are a lot of things that we're doing. We have to test out a lot of things. And we just have to make that investment and try these new things and make deep investment in some things that are women-led and black and brown-led in the same way as we would if they were white male with a tie-led.
With a tie.
And Ngozi, can I say, I really welcome that view, because I had a moment of reckoning a few years ago when I thought, having kind of been involved in sustainable fashion from kind of quite early days and thinking, oh, it's so great, and we've got the gang, and I go to the conferences and I see everyone all the time, it's all warm and fuzzy. And then I suddenly thought, but hang on, that's not cool, because if you just build, it's great to have the friend. I do agree, it's one, I think you can get a lot of stuff done through the friendship, but we also have to open up and diversify and bring in these new perspectives. So I thank you, I really, really welcome that perspective. And actually, I've got some questions coming in online, which also from Mickey Weiner, thank you very much, sorry. So and it picks up on your point about production. So I'm going to try and motor through as many as we can, so talk quite quickly. Great to hear circularity coming to conversation as a viable possibility for responsible production. However, when brands are still committed to overproduction to meet growth-centered bottom lines, what is the viable solution when overproduction is at direct odds with our planet's carrying capacity? So obviously we've touched on this a little bit, but does anyone want to jump in with a response to that? Devon? It's about what's the solution to overproduction?
Yeah, I mean, I think the intention of a business is never to overproduce, and so the accuracy with which we understand what the need in the market is for our product, it shouldn't happen, and I think, but at the flip side of it is, we as brands do have a responsibility, and certainly it is part of our strategy at Ralph Lauren, to make to make our products desirable generation after generation, not just for the season that we had a runway show a little over a week ago, and while we're showing new styles, it's all based in this over 50 years of creating something that you purchase and can wear for, you know, hand down over generations. And we actually had, just to your point about the role that media and celebrity and culture creators impact that they can have, we had a lot of that dialogue coming from celebrity and talent that we have relationships with, that the reason they love Ralph Lauren is because of the authenticity and because of the fact that they, you know, inherited something from their mother, or that they were able to really hang on to the product for, you know, 20 years or more because of the quality of it. So I think that, yes, we have to be better always around forecasting and, you know, understanding demand. And at the same time, we have to be creating more desirability to hang on to and really treasure the products that we have put out into the world, so that their value is retained.
Totally. And if I may, you know, sometimes we kind of think either or. You can only hang on to something that's from a certain brand. And we just like to say, I've got an H&M jumper that I've been wearing for 20 years. So I just wanted to bring that into the room. Samata, did you want to come in on that?
I did have some thoughts. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
I did have some thoughts. I thought first of all, I think there's two different ways to look at overproduction. I think there is more kind of specific and targeted production models. So there's kind of better forecasting. This is how many of this we will need. And so there's that side of it that obviously businesses can invest in, and that involves use of technology, investment in technology that can help kind of further that aim. It's everything from more accurate fit models. We know that also overproduction is also linked to inaccurate fit. There's all of these other pieces. But I think there's this other side of overproduction, which is, why are we promising so much new stuff in? Like I see these kind of headlines. It's like, you know, 10,000 new styles in whatever amount of time. I'm like, you don't have to make so many options of things. It's not just about making so much of one thing. It's why is there so much of all of these different things? So I think that's one thing that does bother me. And I think the other idea is, I still feel we need to move away from this focus on products. I feel that there needs to be this transition towards products and services, because you can still have a desire to have longevity with something if you can go into, say, that brand and sit down and have a mending class with someone from their atelier. So this idea that we can almost commercialize services as a form of revenue and not purely products, because product is this kind of transactional thing. We want a relationship. We want something that goes beyond a monetary value. And I think when you talk about a viable solution, I think that's part of it. It's changing this mindset. It's reimagining what services you can sell alongside your products that push a more sustainable model.
We have a thing at Futerra around, when you're selling sustainability, think about the benefits. There's functional benefits, but there's also social and emotional benefits, and building that relationship in that way massively goes from that. Okay, I want to say, I'll come to you in just a moment. I know there's going to be so many questions from the floor. I would like to get just one more online, and then we'll go to the floor, which is, sorry, I don't have the name here, but hi, I really like the fashion charter conversation. And I would love to hear more on the supply chain and the connections of relationships between Indigenous communities and the difficulty of regulating. Lindita, I think that was where you were, if you could.
I mean, I think if you just look at the entire global climate architecture, right? You realize that we are living in times where things have to change, but as we change things, we've got to make sure that we do it by having considerations on equity, by making sure that there is no food poverty, by making sure that, you know, all other sustainable development goals are really thought, and we make progress not just in climate, because it's going to be a cross-cutting thing, but in all those different aspects. So I think in the Fashion Charter, we've been looking at why can we not move faster as a collective? Why is it that there's always some challenges, some difficulties? And of course, there's companies that have, you know, are leading in the space, and some of them are here. And certainly, we are talking about, you know, not every company will have the same level of maturity. Not every company will have the same finances, the same kind of capacity as well to deal with these issues. But I think when we looked at the collective, we understood that there's really not a common understanding of what collective means. And you know, you then come to these really difficult conversations. Who pays for decarbonization of the fashion industry? Is it brands? Is it manufacturers? Is it financial institutions? Is it a combination of all? And you know, in these conversations, we've also spoken a little bit about supplier incentive. And one of our manufacturers in the charter said, please don't use that word. word. It's so condescending. We need to be talking about how do we better collaborate with one another. And then, of course, this goes again back to the holistic approaches, because even if you are looking at companies, and this is why governance in climate action is so important, you've got to have sourcing teams and sustainability teams working hand in hand together. Because sometimes people, supply chain actors, are confused by different requests that they receive from sourcing and sustainability people, right? And I know how difficult it is to coordinate. I work in the UN, trust me.
She knows.
But I think it's really important to start having those difficult conversations now, because we are right there where we're kind of stuck. How do we move forward at speed and scale?
Right. And the conversation I think at this week has been already more radical than we've seen in previous weeks. You know, not so much talking about the transition from fossil fuels, but the phase out. Helen, the CEO of Climate Group, talking about vested interests on day one. So I think we're a bit more ready to have this conversation now. All right, we've got 5 minutes to do some rapid quick-fire questions on the floor. The guy with the microphone's in charge, so he's going to choose who talks, I'm afraid. Thank you very much. And if you could, I'm sorry, but if you could keep your questions quite brief and to the point, that would be fantastic.
Okay, I'll try to make this really quick. So fashion is business, and with systems at play, we're perpetuating a lot of inequity. And I just want to talk a little bit more about the wealth gap, specifically where it's happening in, sorry, this question's getting long, specifically in like Asian countries where the wealth disparity is very massive. They own 55% of the global textiles right now, manufacturing. How are we addressing this, and do you have any solutions to address the inequity in this current wealth gap that's happening?
Thank you very much. Does anyone want to jump in on that, or I could answer it? If not, Isabella, yeah?
Out of script.
Yeah.
It's unclear if you speak about wealth gap in the context of the fashion industry or in general, but what is clear is that some, the things that we wear in the context of the fashion industry, for instance, I don't know if they completely reflect the price that is behind what we pay. So just zooming into a industry, but could be the same for the food industry, where people pick up tomatoes, in Italy for, I don't know, €5 the hour. The issue is who gets paid, how much, and across the whole chain. And so for me, when things are very cheap, I always wonder who is being paid. I'm sure there is systems, but the question is, things are transported around the world. We don't pay for petrol, there's no taxes on petrol for international transportation. So the price of bringing things around the world doesn't reflect the environmental or the social cost of bringing things around the world. How much people are paid, maybe some companies are very careful, others may not be that careful. So it's really a matter of looking at all the aspects around an industry and around a system, as Lindita says, and understanding who's getting the value, who's bringing the value, and who's receiving value from the work that they have or the service that they provide. Hope it makes sense.
And I would possibly point to Fashion Revolution, who've done some really interesting campaigns and work around minimum wage, but also living wage, and why is living wage different to minimum wage? Can't it should be the same thing? So that's quite a good set of resources, I think. One more question.
Yes, this can apply to either people that participated in the playbook or like in a sense of cultural significance, but I'm kind of curious because a lot of the tastemakers in the fashion world are very exclusive to their conversations and also their marketing conversations. And I think obviously as we talk about cultures and you think about subcultures, it can be a little bit inaccessible. And I wondered if you guys had any sort of perspective on tapping that more and speaking about like collaborative marketing, because again, you guys only are in your vertical of industry or you're in your own communities that collectively don't talk the same. So from like a marketing perspective, how are we bringing these conversations into these worlds so people feel connected to them personally? I don't know if that applies to marketing or, again, a cultural conversation.
Yeah.
Because, again, aesthetics of like artistic communication, that looks different to everybody. I didn't know if there were anybody that kind of would want to speak to that.
I can try. So it's okay, I'll have a go at this. So I think what resonates for me with that question, I'll give an example of a recent project I was involved in. So with my organisation Black Pearl, we're really, really passionate about using education as a vehicle. And so we just participated in developing the fashion programming for a climate festival by Billie Eilish. And the whole premise of that was, I have this young fan base who are interested in some kind of more social issues. They don't fully grasp those issues and I don't want to overwhelm them. But I know how to communicate with them visually through my music, through what I do. How can we create a visually and mentally stimulating experience where they can be drawn in across kind of socioeconomics, different backgrounds, different genders, and feel welcome in the space, but we can still educate them and download content to them. So then what I look at is, the lens I then apply is, okay, so first of all, who's joining this conversation with us? How is the fashion industry being represented on our panel? I brought in this amazing author who's just written a book on the relationship of fashion psychology to talk about how we are basically, we are essentially being sold to when we go into stores. So a lot of young people are going into these stores and they're being bombarded with sales messages. So she had this really great perspective, phenomenal author who's just written a book called Big Dress Energy. So she's coming from this kind of South London background of kind of going into Primark basically and having this moment of like, I cannot get out of here alive. So she has her perspective. Then we have this great independent designer, Colombian designer, who's come over from another country, who set up a business here. So she's a startup. So she's not this inaccessible luxury brand that doesn't, she's literally, and from their perspective, I mean, in terms of price points, she's a kind of small independent designer who has what would be considered more accessible price point for them. So when she's talking about how she approaches design, she's looking at how they're looking for clothes and what they can afford and what they're looking for on a label. And then we also had someone from Fashion Revolution.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
Good,
and
yeah.
she's talking about policy and telling them how they can engage through social media and what they should be using their voices to advocate for. So I think, to me, the answer to your question is, whose voices are we bringing into the conversation when we're shaping our communication? How are we visually designing that? Just really quickly with the Oscars initiative, I was very careful about the ambassadors I was choosing. I was choosing people like Lakeith Stanfield speaks to the African-American black male perspective. Danielle McDonald speaks to like a plus size, different body shape perspective. Marley Matlin is sign language, like doing sign from the red carpet. She speaks to the disabled community. Whose voices are we using for this communication? Because if we make sure that they're varied and rich and dense enough, I feel that we'll always at least show that we're trying to bring in as many people as possible. I hope that answers.
No, that's exactly it. I think it's
just
cool. How do we
Yeah.
take that model and apply it to other people in the
Yeah.
advertising world or even just like other verticals? I think that's perfect.
Okay.
I think actually that piece, it's very nascent and new, but we're at Futerra, we're working on a few projects where we're working with the creators and influencers and actually building confidence and capability from the creator and influencer community to be able to talk to their followers in the way that their followers want to be talked to. So very tailored, very targeted, not general sustainability over here, but what does it mean for you? And how do you and then how do you build coalitions so that brands will actually fund this, basically? So we get sustainable lifestyles briefs going to these creators, not just product or sustainable product briefs. So that's one I'm really excited about. Okay, we have to stop. I'm really sorry. I honestly could have, I hear this quite at the end of panels, but I really mean it this time. Could have gone on for another hour and a half. So really, can we thank our panelists who've been fantastic.